Israel threatens a ground assault in Rafah by Ramadan if hostages are not freed. Plus, the International Court of Justice begins hearings into the legality of Israel's occupation of the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem. Hello, I'm Adnan Abu Hasna. This is The Heat. The United States has been widely criticized at the United Nations for vetoing a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. This, as Israel has yet to present a plan to protect more than 1 million civilians in Rafah ahead of its threatened assault on that border city. For more, we turn now to Elena Bakatoris, who is with the Associated Press in Jerusalem. Elena, Israel's threat to ramp up military operations in Rafah, that hangs over that city, and there's more than 1 million Palestinians in that part of Gaza. What's the latest there?
Well, Israel has been insistent that this is the only way to win the war, that it must go after Hamas. It says that the Hamas is still has a stronghold in Rafah, and that the only way to win the war and to get the hostages back, of whom there are about 100 still believed to be alive in Gaza, is to crush Hamas and is to carry out a ground invasion into Rafah. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister had said that there would be a plan for the evacuation of people from there. There's more than half of Gaza's population is now sheltering in Rafah. We haven't yet seen a timeline for the evacuation or details of indeed where these people would go. Recently, one of the 3-member war cabinet said that the invasion would go ahead if the hostages are not released by Ramadan, which begins around March the 10th.
Now, that other development that we talked about, Elena, the International Court of Justice, it began 6 days of hearings into the legality of Israel's occupation of the West Bank, of Gaza and East Jerusalem this week. Now, the judges, of course, could take months to issue an opinion. Then what happens?
Well, that is unclear. I mean, this is an advisory opinion. It's not binding. Israel has already said, the Prime Minister has already said, that it doesn't recognize the legality of the discussion being held in the International Court. But of course, it will have a big symbolic value if the court finds that Israel should withdraw from these territories. These are territories that the Palestinians want for a future state of their own. Israel has been very clear that it disagrees with that this cannot happen at this time, even though there has been a lot of international pressure, including from the United States, that the recognition of a separate Palestinian state should be part of an overall solution that would bring lasting peace to the region.
Thanks, Elena. That's Elena Bakatoris reporting from Jerusalem. Well, in another blow for Palestinians in Gaza, substantial funding for the main UN aid organization, UNRWA, has been suspended by more than a dozen key donors, including the United States. That's after Israel accused a dozen members of the agency of taking part in the October 7th attacks in Israel. I spoke with UNRWA's media advisor, Adnan Abu Hasna, about that and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Adnan, thanks so much for joining us. Funding for UNRWA has been suspended by some of its main donors, including the United States, and that suspension came after Israel alleged that about a dozen UNRWA workers were also members of Hamas. The Israelis have since said that there are 30 more members of Hamas who are also working for UNRWA. The Israelis have not provided any evidence, but funding, as I said, has been suspended. How is that impacting your operations?
Yes, it's extremely impacting our operation, despite that what we got from the Israelis is a little of, or some information. It's right now, it's allegation. It's not proven, right now. We established, or the UN actually established, 2 committees. One of them is, investigating all the cases that the Israelis, talking about. They talked about 12 UNRWA staff members. 9 of them have been immediately fired from or ending their contracts. But right now, they did not provide us with the full information for how it impacted actually our work. I believe that it will extremely impact the whole operation of the agency at the end of March, because what we have, the financial resources that we have, it will be enough until the end of March. But after that, we may stop the whole operation, not only in Gaza, but also in the 5 fields of operation in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Gaza, and East Jerusalem.
Now, does UNRWA have any other means of raising funds? What about other UN members?
Some donors, actually, they did not suspend funding UNRWA, like Ireland, like Spain, Belgium, still, contributing to UNRWA, but to tell the truth, to be honest, that these countries, 16 countries actually, they donated nearly 70% of UNRWA's budget last year. So there is right now there is no alternative. We are looking forward for traditional donors, to those who did not stop their funding to UNRWA, to the Gulf, to the Arab world, to step forward and contributing, donating to UNRWA, because stopping the operations, it will extremely affect the regional stability in the region. Beside abandoning, there are 600,000 students, from their schools, and we have also, more than 1.7 million Palestinian refugees who are benefiting from, either food or cash assistance in all fields of operation, something like that. To stop our, operation in health, we have nearly 150 health clinics. Last year, the number of, health visits our clinics, more than 9 million visits in 2023.
The head of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, he said, and I'm quoting him here, he said, the agency shares the list of all its staff with host countries every year, including Israel. The agency never received any concerns on specific staff members, unquote. Which raises the question, why do you think Israel made these allegations and raised these issues at this time?
I don't know. The Israelis can answer this question, but we used to provide the Israelis with the names of our staff long time ago, more than 15 years. At the beginning of every year, we are sending the list of the names of our staff to the Israeli Authority, not only to Israel, but to the all host countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Palestine, and Israel. They never ever came back to us with any indication or remarks that about someone that he belonged to this organization, or he doing something wrong here or there. But so I'm not sure why they actually, now they are talking about some people who are affiliated with some Palestinian organization here, out there, but they should have told us, because we at UNRWA, we don't have the intelligence capacity. We are just a humanitarian organization.
Right. Now, looking at the humanitarian situation in Gaza right now, the group Save the Children says the conflict in Gaza has killed about 12,400 children. There are 1 million children who remain at risk of continued bombing, starvation, disease, and of course, the mental stresses of the war that's taking place right now. What can you tell us about the current and long-term impact this conflict is having on the children of Gaza?
We can talk about 90% of Gaza children, they are sick, actually. They are, having only 1 or 2 meals per day on specific, kinds of food. There are not, diversity of food, actually. That 80% or 75% actually of these children, they are drinking undrinkable, water. Disease is spreading fastly in the Gaza Strip, and especially among children. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of children are suffering from diarrhea here in the Gaza Strip. Skin diseases. It's something horrible what's going on, and we believe that if the shelling and shelling of artillery or tanks or Israeli jets will not kill Palestinians or these kids, they will be dying because of diseases at the end.
The threat to UNRWA that we're hearing right now is not new. The New York Times reports that Israel has a history of friction with this agency. The Israeli Prime Minister has called for the end of UNRWA's mission. And last week, the Israeli Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, called for Lazzarini to resign, saying UNRWA is, quote, an arm of Hamas and part of the problem. UNRWA, he said, has no place in Gaza. He provided no evidence, but how great is the risk right now that UNRWA could be facing an existential threat?
Look, UNRWA was not established by an Israeli decision. The UN established the state of Israel and gave UNRWA to the Palestinians. If the Israelis, they want to end the services of UNRWA or to liquidate UNRWA, they should have, gone to United Nations General Assembly, are voting there, and they can get, the majority of the member states to vote for them, and after that they can change what they want. But unless UNRWA enjoyed of the majority of member states supporting UNRWA, just 2 years ago, 170 member states supported UNRWA and renewed its mandate. They talked a lot, about liquidating UNRWA and ending the services for Palestine refugees, but we believe that it's not up to them.
Right.
It's up to international community to talk about that. And we believe also that the Israeli security establishment, they are very well aware of necessity for UNRWA to be here for the stability of the region. And we are talking about nearly 6 million Palestinian refugees that are getting services from us. And we believe UNRWA is irreplaceable, indispensable, and it should continue providing services to Palestinian refugees.
Adnan Abu Hasna, thank you so much for joining us. There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Nabeel Khoury is a veteran U.S. diplomat. He currently is a non-resident senior fellow with the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Saeed Arikat is the Washington correspondent for Al-Quds Daily. And Dan Arbell spent 25 years with the Israeli Foreign Service. He's now a scholar in residence at American University's Center for Israeli Studies. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Dan Arbell, I want to start with the proceedings taking place right now at the International Court of Justice. It's hearing testimony on the legality of Israel's occupation of the West Bank, of Gaza, and of East Jerusalem. The Palestinian foreign minister who gave testimony at that hearing accused Israel of apartheid. The South African ambassador to the Netherlands said Israel was inflicting a more extreme form of apartheid than that existed in South Africa. Now, of course, this is testimony. This is not a ruling. But what do you make of it, and how will the Israelis respond to this?
Thank you, Anna, and always good to be with you. Well, it's a marginal issue which Israelis are not really paying attention to. It's a circus, what's happening at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ in The Hague. Certainly, Israelis are planning to disregard any opinion that is issued by the court. Israel cannot get a fair hearing at this court with justices from countries like Lebanon, Somalia, Russia, China. Certainly, all of them are not in Israel's favor. And so I don't think it will be any opinion that the court will adopt would be fair or objective or impartial. And therefore, I think it's a non-event.
Yeah, Dan, as our correspondent in Jerusalem told us a moment ago, there is no way of actually enforcing any ruling or any decision made by the court. But she also pointed out that any decision that goes against Israel could be seen as very symbolic. What do you make of that?
Yeah, symbolic, exactly. Every year there are dozens of anti-Israel resolutions adopted in the General Assembly of the United Nations, and those continue year after year. If there is war, if there is peace, not connected to reality, and therefore I really think that this is just a farce and should be ignored.
Saad Arikat, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as we've heard, said he would not recognize the legitimacy of the ICJ with a particular reference to this case that it's handling right now. So would it be fair to say that the hearing and whatever ruling that the court may make down the line is just really paper and talk? There's no way of enforcing this, is there?
Yes, of course, there is no way to enforce this because the United States of America continues to give this really monstrous state that is Israel cover, political cover, military cover, every which way. I mean, if you want to talk about the occupation, there's actually a resolution, many resolutions that call for Israel to withdraw from occupied territory. But Israel have chosen all through the decade to behave as a gangster state. It is behaving as such today. So, I mean, your guest talks about it's a non-event and all these things. It is true. It is a non-event. But the writing is on the wall. I think people are beginning to recognize this state as it is, a criminal state that conducts war crimes day in and day out, that kills children by the thousands, that has basically been an aggressor against all the countries in the region. Because it has been, it's been given cover by the colonial powers in the beginning. Yeah. Then, but taken over by the United States of America. So, I mean, there are resolutions. There are, I mean, all this, the status for ending this occupation is there. Okay. And the unfortunate thing, I mean, let me finish, okay? So the unfortunate thing is that the United States of America, the most powerful country in the world, that keeps this state on an American umbilical cord, at one point, it will recognize that Israel is dragging it to the gutter. And I think then there will be changes.
All right, Dan, let me give you a chance for a response to what we just heard there. If you could be brief, please. We don't have too much time today, but, you heard there, Israel being called a gangster state, a criminal state.
It's, I know Said, he's a credible guy, yet his allegations are not serious. He knows the situation quite well. And knowingly, Israel is fighting a war of self-defense in Gaza in response to a horrific attack by Hamas on October 7th, resulting in 1,200 Israelis dead, beheaded, wounded, women raped, and Israel is responding forcefully to this attack. Having said that, also, all this talk about the West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem, the Palestinian state, this should all be settled within the framework of negotiations. Right now, the time probably is not there yet, but when the war is over, perhaps we'll get there.
Okay, Nabeel Khoury, the United States just vetoed a resolution which was tabled by Algeria at the United Nations. That resolution demanded an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. It was the third time that the United States has wielded this veto that it has at the UN Security Council. It is, of course, a permanent member of that council. Now we hear that the United States, President Biden and his administration is offering their own resolution, which doesn't demand a ceasefire, but instead underscores its support for a temporary ceasefire. I should say that this resolution has not been made public yet, but some news agencies have obtained the text of it. And in addition, it does not require one immediately, that's a ceasefire, but rather as soon as practicable. What do you make of this resolution?
Well, the Biden administration's position on this hasn't changed since the beginning of this war. Essentially, that Israel has the right to pursue Hamas, bearing in mind that they should try to minimize civilian casualties. From the beginning, any talk of ceasefire was dismissed by the Biden administration. And humanitarian pause is the phrase that they have used most often. They're paying lip service to the idea of going back to talks about a Palestinian state, a two-state solution, Essentially, this administration is not serious about ending this war or about finding permanent peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Um, what's going on really right now, both in terms of Israeli behavior, the talk about 1,200 Israeli casualties is never coupled with the more than 27,000 Palestinian casualties and ongoing. Mm-hmm. So what is the ratio that Israel is really looking for here? What makes up for 1,200 casualties? 30,000, 40,000 Palestinians? What do they think is equivalent? What is happening here is clearly undermining whatever was left of the moral and legal foundation of the United Nations and of the international community. I'm sorry to hear Dan say that the ICJ hearings are a circus and a sideshow, but in fact, he is correct. Not because it's unfair to Israel, but because there is power politics in the world, and there is the Security Council at the UN, and the big powers have the veto power, and that is what is undermining the legal and moral basis of the United Nations. The United Nations should be able to, in an objective way, find an end to this war and a solution to the Palestinian problem.
Right.
But big powers, and specifically in this case, sorry to say, the US is undermining that.
Dan, looking at the situation on the ground in Gaza, Israel says it will go ahead with its attacks in Rafah, that's in the southern part of Gaza, it's a border city, if its hostages are not released by Ramadan. And as our reporter told us, that's in just a few weeks, on March 10th or 11th, that's about the time it starts. Do you know if there's any negotiations when Israel talks about the release of its hostages on whether Israel would release the prisoners that Hamas has been demanding it release as part of a hostage, as part of a deal?
I think that Israel's warning that it would enter Rafah is at this point right now a pressure tool to bring Hamas to agree to compromise on a deal. And as part of any future deal, and I think that, and I'm hearing reports from the region that there are discussions behind the scenes between the parties through intermediaries.
Right.
Any hostage deal would involve necessarily, first of all, a ceasefire on behalf of Israel, and also some amount of prisoners that are held in Israel to be released by Israel in return for the hostages. So it does look like any future deal would involve a release of hostages, a release of some prisoners, and then a temporary ceasefire.
Said Arikat, as we heard from our reporter, Israel has not presented a plan to safeguard and protect more than 1 million civilians in Rafah ahead of that military offensive that it's threatening right now. What do you say to those who argue that thousands of innocent lives could be saved if the hostages are released now?
Well, I think that all hostages ought to be released. All prisoners ought to be released. The same thing with Palestinian prisoners. And Israel has taken 6,000. Think about it for a minute. They have taken 6,000 Palestinian hostages since October 7th. Look at it. This is really what is happening. So those ought to be released. They should not be held there to begin with. There are 1,800 Palestinians that are serving what they call administrative detention sentences for decades. Decades. They are there, year after year, decade after decade, without charges, including children, including women that give, birth to children in these prisons. So that's where the talk ought to be. First of all, you should not go night after night, to raid homes, take children, put them away, use Palestinian kids as human shields on Israeli military cards and so on. So let negotiations take place, but be real, be sincere. Not every time, every time there is negotiation and Israel releases few Palestinian prisoners, they go and they rearrest them again. They put them back in prison and so on.
Right.
So
I'm sorry to interrupt, Saeed. I'm rapidly running out of time, and I want to look at the real humanitarian situation on the ground here. We've heard all the numbers of people who've died, the numbers of people wounded, the numbers of people who've been homeless, numbers of people who are now have been displaced. We had this from Diana Al-Bukhari, a woman who lives in Gaza. This is what she said. Let's listen.
Every day I wake up, I feel like I imagine that I'm in my house until I see the numbers I count in the wall since the war started. The first thing I do, I think if I'll get water today or not. We put the gallons of water in lines until the water truck comes. It takes days to come. And then I think about food. Will we gonna eat food today or not? Palestinians are being murdered. Palestine is being demolished. I think we all gonna wipe out. You imagine that 1.5 million refugees in just a small area like Rafah? I mean, it's devastation. I don't know what's gonna happen. I hope this not happen. I hope.
So, Dan Arbell, what would you say to someone like that? I mean, we're hearing the real human tragedy that's unfolding in Gaza right now.
You're asking me?
Yes, Dan, go ahead. I've only got a minute, sorry.
Okay, tragic, any loss of innocent lives is tragic. But Hamas can end this right away. It can either surrender or release all the hostages. The war would be over. So the ball is in Hamas's court, and it should act. Once it does that, I think the war can be over very easily, very soon.
Okay, Nabeel, I've got 20 seconds. Dan's been very generous with us. What is your response to what you just heard?
It's really very hard to watch these videos. It hurts deeply. The human misery is unimaginable. Israel should feel ashamed. I know that hundreds of thousands of Israelis feel ashamed of what their government is doing. None of this will stop until the Netanyahu government is taken out.
Okay. That's where we have to end it. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.